FSN Radio. It's all about what's next. Go to financialsurvivalnetwork.com and sign up for your free weekly newsletter. You'll also get 3 free reports. The Financial Survival Network. It's all about what's next.
Welcome. You are listening to the Financial Survival Network. I'm Kerry Lutz, and today is April 17th, 2017. Well, if you're watching, you saw President Trump get together with the president of China, Xi. I'm saying that correctly. And trade was supposed to be the big elephant in the room. Looks like it may have been put off for a little bit. Putting it charitably. Well, we want to get Michael Stumo's take on that. Michael, you're CEO of Coalition for Prosperous America. You're a nonprofit organization representing the interest of 2.7 million households through your agricultural, manufacturing, and labor members. So we are thrilled to have you on the show again.
Thanks for having me, Kerry. It's great to be here.
So first, your organization, it kind of sounds very broad. What's your purpose, if you had to sum it up?
Right. So we're concerned about U.S. trade agreements, trade policy, trade deficits that the U.S. buys more than it sells and exports our wealth to other countries. We want to fix the trade deficit. Happy that Trump wants to fix the trade deficit and protect our sovereignty against these international agreements that cramp what we can do through our own Congress. Mm-hmm. So we're right to left. We're truly bipartisan, not nonpartisan. We're bipartisan. We've got our chairman, Dan D'Amico, was part of Trump's trade transition team. And on the other side, we've got AFL-CIO's Industrial Union Council, which the industrial unions, mine workers and auto workers and the like, they're all concerned about the U.S. trade deficit and losing market share globally. And of course, we have agriculture too. So trade doesn't cut cleanly across party lines, but we're roughly happy with what Trump's doing now.
And it's interesting, Michael, because before this election, nobody was talking about trade, except every now and then the deficit would get high with Japan or now with China. And all of a sudden it would become an issue du jour, soon to be forgotten. I don't think we're looking at that type of attitude towards it anymore. Do you?
No, we started in 2007. We started talking about trade deficits, and people looked at us like we had a screw loose. And then it started getting more popular in 2013 and 2014, when Obama was seeking fast-track trade authority, and we started educating Republicans and Democrats on this, and we almost won that battle. And then with TPP, we were winning, and of course Trump pledged to stop the Trans-Pacific Partnership, which was a 12-nation global agreement on trade among Pacific Rim countries. And then, of course, Trump has changed the momentum on that issue. But Obama's, head of the Council of Economic Advisors, Jason Furman, doesn't think trade deficits matter.
Until they do, right?
43. Yeah.
Until they do matter.
Yeah. Bush's guys didn't think so. And now it's very different. So now the question is how to fix it, not whether they matter. So that's a good step.
Hey, so when you look at NAFTA, all right, NAFTA is like the poster child for this. Before NAFTA, the U.S. had a $1 billion trade surplus with Mexico. Now we have a $160 billion a year trade deficit with Mexico. So is this typical of our trade agreements, what they do for the country?
Yeah. There's a few trade agreements that we've done a little better afterward. Several of them we've done worse. South Korea was a disaster. Letting China into the WTO, which is the WTO, World Trade Organization, is a multilateral or worldwide trade agreement.
Disaster.
That was an absolute disaster. And so, our view is the countries that are the big surplus countries, the ones that export to us far more than they import from us, and so suck wealth out of our economy, they do things that trade agreements don't really get at. So trade agreements are either harmful or irrelevant. They're one of the two. And so we've got to do some unilateral action to stop being the world consumer of last resort.
Or first resort, or
first resort.
It's your ticket to the good life when you get the U.S. to start buying your products. Well, it's done a lot of bad things because besides the deficits, the real effect has been structural unemployment and reduction of manufacturing employment and lowering of the living standards of the middle class, right? I mean, we're not just imagining this.
Yeah, I mean, we've got, you offshore all this industry, massive amounts of industry, and you get rid of a good, a full-time, good-paying job with $60,000 to $80,000 and replace it with a low-wage, low-hour job, 30 hours a week at, $8 to $12 an hour. And the statistics say, hey, we got the same number of jobs, but you're replacing good jobs with low-wage, low-hour jobs. Yeah. You get wage stagnation, depression, white middle-class suicide, opium addiction, community decay. And that's what's happening.
God, yeah. It's been nothing short of a major disaster. You have Detroit and you have Cleveland and other major industrial hubs, which are withered away to nothing.
Well, you look at, everything between the big cities. The big cities voted for Hillary. Everything in between voted for Trump. And a large portion of that is income insecurity, which is slightly different than income inequality. Income inequality is I don't have as much as that guy. Yeah. Income insecurity means I don't have enough to live. My life is falling apart. I feel horrible. My family's falling apart. And we just need to get, our jobs back. And that's beyond Detroit and Cleveland. It's spread to, so much of the country.
Of course. Those are the poster children. And
sure. Yeah.
And so, look, his pledge to bring back jobs, factory jobs, etc., is that realistic? Can it really be done?
Yeah. So if you do a combination of things to balance our trade deficit, we have about $500 million overall. $700 million of it is goods, where the jobs are.
Billion with a B, right?
Billion is in B. Yeah. If we were to trend toward balance in a few years, that's probably 5 to 8 million jobs. Mm-hmm. You can do things with currency. Other countries cheat with their currency. They cheat with, massive subsidies, with tax schemes, tax rebates at the border. If you just unilaterally start neutralizing that with these countries, you can start bringing, hundreds of thousands and then a few million jobs back. It isn't next week. It's over a several-year period of time. But if you look at England, when they did the Brexit last year, people said they were going to, England's going to go into a depression. They're going to be a financial calamity. They're doing quite well because the British pound devalued a little bit, making British goods cheaper. They had a bigger trade deficit than us in relation to their economic size, and they've almost halved it in a year just because of post-Brexit, pound sterling devaluation. It's been very swift, swifter than I ever thought would happen.
So is devaluation the key for the U.S.? Do we want a weak dollar or just weaker?
We want a fairly priced dollar. We're overvalued. People call it a strong dollar. It's really a bloated dollar. It makes our goods too expensive. We don't want a weak dollar, but we want a we're probably 17 to 20% overvalued. Mm-hmm. And if we were to get it just right at fair value, that would make all our goods 17 to 20% cheaper. And frankly, make imports 70 to 20% more expensive, but it would put a lot of people back to work like we're seeing in England.
So what about this border adjustment tax deal, which amounts to effectively a tariff, let's face it? Is it time for that? Is that the best way to do this, or is there a better way? Because everyone else, 150 countries have got these border adjustment taxes. We just said when we were doing the WTO, World Trade Organization, from what I understand, is, we don't need that. We're not going to bother. And the only major country that doesn't have one. So is the border adjustment tax part of the solution?
Yeah, it's a big part of it. Now, the Paul Ryan, Kevin Brady plan is dead, and it's the wrong flavor of border adjustable tax to do. It's not like what other countries do. It's kind of a weird version. We actually don't necessarily support it in my organization. Most countries have a VAT, which is a tax on consumption. And you think, what do we want another tax for? And just bear with me for a second. But when we ship to other countries, we have our full tax burden in our goods, our autos, plus we pay 17% of tax on the value of our goods to pay for their roads and their national health care and their pension plans. Mm-hmm. So we're double taxed. When other countries ship here, they rebate that 17%, like an export subsidy. They get a check, and so they come out partially taxed, and we don't tax them. So how do we level that playing field? We do our own VAT, but then we do our own VAT, let's say at 13%, But then we use the proceeds of that new tax revenue to eliminate, in our view, the payroll tax burden, which is for self-employed, it's 15.3% of your income.
Tell me about it. I know only too well.
Yeah. And if you're a worker, you get 7.65. I might be wrong on the percent slightly.
It's over 15.
It might have changed a bit.
It's over 15.
But it's 15.3. Yeah. And then the employer pays 7.65. So that's about 1.1 trillion a year for the country. If you do a 13% VAT at about 1.4 trillion, you just offset the payroll tax. So we pay more for goods, but we get an immediate raise, and all our businesses do. So we're held harmless, but we export VAT-free, which is like a 13% subsidy in this case, and all the Chinese container ships coming in pay a 13% tax, so they pay for our roads and our Social Security, et cetera. And that's how they should do it, and I'm hoping they get there.
It's an interesting thing. Before we had an income tax, before we had a Federal Reserve, the primary means of supporting the government was excise taxes on alcohol and tariffs. Okay. Now we have prohibition does away with the excise tax on liquor. And they say, well, don't worry about it. We'll just do an income tax. And it's only a couple percent, and only on the wealthy. No one will ever notice it. And here we are today, right? We got no tariffs. Right. We've got plenty of taxes on liquor, and we're a mess.
Yeah, that's right. The foreigners paid our taxes, and we chose to have our domestic people pay our taxes. And when they talk about tariff cuts, nobody talks about it in this way, that when you cut tariffs, you have to replace that tax revenue with taxes on our own citizens. Yeah, which is what we've done.
Right. Yeah, it's got to come from someplace. I always like the old. You see it often on the internet. Before 1913, the U.S. didn't have an income tax or a Federal Reserve. Roads got built, schools were built. The government ran. How did they do it then, and they can't do it now?
Well, that's right. Of course, our life expectancy was about 57 then.
Yeah, that's true.
But you do the VAT. There is a case to be made for tariffs now. I don't know if it's 35%. We're actually contracting a study by a former guy from McKinsey, the consultancy firm. There's some accepted macroeconomic models that you plug in different things like tax changes, tariff changes, and the like, and see what comes out. We want to see what the model says if we do a VAT, or if we do a tariff on Mexico or China or in the world. Not that we're proposing it, but we want to see what the macroeconomic model at the oil companies and the U.S. International Trade Commission, what they use. What does it say will happen with a tariff? And we don't think it'll be quite as catastrophic as people say, and you're going to get more employment and the like. But we'll reserve judgment until we get the numbers back.
Yeah. Well, I'll tell you what. It's time to really focus in on this. You can't run $500 billion deficits and expect that your country is going to be okay and your currency is going to not collapse at some point. So, and that goes with the budget deficits as well, but we're not talking about that now. So an attitude adjustment. Obviously, we don't want to send the world into a major depression. The other thing is you got the Federal Reserve jacking up interest rates, which is going to make, in theory at least, the dollar stronger. And you've got you got the cataclysm in Europe of a possible election of Marine Le Pen or any other number of other cohorts, which is going to kill the euro. So it's a very tenuous situation. What's the best way to cover it here? We don't want to destroy the world, to save ourselves, because it is one world. So what do we do here, Michael?
Right. So you got to focus on rebalancing. I mean, we've got about 10 countries that are the big surplus countries in relation to the U.S. About 10 countries make up 90% of our trade deficit. Mm-hmm. China, Germany, Japan, South Korea are some of the worst actors globally. And they export, they overproduce, they don't consume as much as they produce, and they rely on the rest of the world to consume their overproduction, including us. So in effect, they're exporting their unemployment to us. And all we're talking about is rebalancing. So they can, they don't overproduce, they don't have overcapacity and harm other countries, and that we don't have, underutilized labor, underutilized plant capacity, that we produce a bit more, consume about in relation to what we produce, still trade vigorously. And that's got to be, it's really, the key isn't free trade versus protectionism or trade versus no trade. It's trade, but balance it out so that you don't get, some countries sucking wealth out of other countries persistently. And you do that with currency, maybe with some tariffs, maybe with some VAT, maybe with some vigorous enforcement against the countries that subsidize their national champion industries so they get unearned advantages to grab global market share.
Right.
You do things like that, but your lodestar is to get overall balance, so you don't have this wealth sucking from some countries to others.
Mm-hmm. So what about dealing with Mexico? Because there's another situation where you push too hard, you're going to turn them into a failed state.
Right. So Mexico, one thing about China, when they joined the WTO and started sucking wealth out of the U.S., they actually made their people richer. Mexico didn't. Mexico, since the NAFTA, they got a lot of jobs in industry in the maquiladoras, but their income per capita is about the same now as it was then. And they've got a lot of other, China's a state capitalist. State capitalism is different than like Soviet Union, where the government owns everything.
Right.
The Chinese own about 60 or 70%, and they kind of mix capitalism with their central planned communist economy. And they've done it pretty successfully. We thought you could never do it, but you can. They did a blended version. But Mexico's got a drug cartel state.
Yeah.
They've got, issues. They just caught a former governor of one of their states in Italy.
Oh my God. Yeah.
They've got violence. They've got upheaval. If you have NAFTA or you don't have NAFTA, I think maybe relatively irrelevant to them, because they've got to fix their internal institutions.
Yeah. So a top to bottom reorg and get rid of the corruption, or at least bring it under control. Look, it happened. Yeah. It happened in Colombia. So if Colombia can do it, I got to believe Mexico can do it if there's a will to do it, of course.
Yeah, I can't pretend to have the answer. That's not my area of expertise. But you have a trade agreement or not is irrelevant to the question of whether they are a functioning state, a functioning government that can provide, security, safety, and the things the government should be providing to its citizens. Without, you got 8 or 10 families in Mexico own like 90% of the economy.
Yeah.
Maybe they'd be better off just nationalizing the wealth of those 8 families and dropping that wealth from an airplane for people to pick up in the streets and get their consumption going, get their economy going, get the velocity of money going in their economy. I don't know. Just a wild idea.
Yeah, I know what you're saying. You got and it comes over the border. I'm not just talking about drugs. Carlos Slim owns the Obama phone company along with Jeb Bush. So you're really talking crony capitalism at its worst, and it's cancerous, right? It spreads.
It is, because what those 8 or 10 families do, they don't. Henry Ford made his workers wealthy, so they had enough money to speed the velocity of money in the economy, so they could buy Ford automobiles and other things. But you have those 8 families; they don't spend and consume; they amass. Everyone else spends, and of course, poor people spend more than they have and incur debt. But the wealthy, they amass money, and you actually lower demand in the economy. So you're going to invest in something for people to buy, but they don't have any money to buy. Just 8 families. There's a happy medium somewhere, and you don't want to be, communist and nationalizing wealth. But in a way, there's kind of a theoretical argument here.
Yeah. Yep. Agreed. Well, hey, there's a lot of problems out there. At least now we're paying attention to some of them. So that's a definite plus. Michael, we want to find out more about you, more about Prosperous America. What do we do?
Well, right now we want to help, even though we have labor folks that don't like Trump that much, but they like the trade policy. We want to, and we of course have a lot of Republicans that like Trump more than trade as well.
Yeah.
But we've got to be supportive of him on the trade deficit and give him space to operate so that he can, focus on remedying this trade deficit without obstruction by the globalists in Congress.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's what we're really focused on. He's got a 100-day plan now with China. We hope for more action, but they did the Xi-Trump summit, a couple weeks back.
Yes.
And they came up with a 100-day plan that's going to focus on reducing the trade deficit. Now that it could be just talk like Bush and Obama did. It could be real. They could trade off foreign policy cooperation with North Korea in return for, our economy, which has been done in the past, or they could be aggressive. What's going to be the key is whether in the public and puts pressure on Congress, so the Congress obstructionists and the House leadership and the Senate leadership don't prevent Trump from doing what's needed to be done, and we continue giving him that support to keep incrementally finding solutions on currency, on the potential on tariffs, or to neutralize other countries cheating. That's going to be important.
Absolutely. Well, hey, best place to go is prosperousamerica.org. Check out the site and the work that you guys are doing. If you have any questions or comments about this show or any others, feel free to send us an email to kl@kerrylutz.com, kl@kerrylutz.com. Twitter feed is @KerryLutz. Facebook page is Financial Survival Network. Michael, thanks so much for coming back with us. Great to talk to you, and keep up the great work.
Thanks, Kerry.
FSN Radio. It's all about what's next. Go to financialsurvivalnetwork.com and sign up for your free weekly newsletter. You'll also get 3 free reports. The Financial Survival Network. It's all about what's next.